Welcome everybody to AP Live. For those joining us for the first time, we are United We. United We advances all women's economic and civic leadership to make meaningful change. And we exist to create gender equity in civic leadership. We're here to encourage you on your civic leadership journey, no matter where you are. United We does this through a variety of activities, including town hall listening sessions, research with partner institutions, on the issues that most impact women, and advocacy work. But today I'm very excited because we are focused on the Appointments Project, or AP. And what's really special about today is that we are here in the beautiful and rapidly growing city of Bentonville, Arkansas, where one of our special guests lives. More on her in a moment. I promise I won't gatekeep for too long. My name is Katie Buckingham. I'll be hosting our time together today. And my colleague, Amy Jonason, is in the chat to monitor your questions and encourage comments. While we get started, we would love to know where you all are joining us from. Before we welcome our Northwest Arkansas All-Stars, we're going to give you a quick rundown on United We's Appointments Project, including our purpose as an organization, why appointments matter, and how you can get involved. So United We's Appointments Project exists to embolden you to take your next steps towards municipal board service, because we know that when women serve on boards and commissions, results happen. Our research shows that increasing gender representation on civic boards and commissions fosters inclusive, equitable, and effective governance. One of the ways that we seek to increase gender representation is through story, celebrating you and y'all, the women who are right now doing that work on the ground in their communities. Today we get to do this celebrating in person, which is a real treat for us, as we're usually all virtual. And so we're so excited to be here. I know that these two women who are sitting next to me will inspire you to take the next steps on your civic leadership journey. Whether you're already serving, and hopefully a number of you are, or not, or you're not sure if municipal board service is even for you, we think it is. AP is here to show you that you're capable, you're knowledgeable, and that your municipality needs your perspective and your voice. You know, AP is a growing program within United We, and a lot of you are new to us. So before we dive into our conversation, I'm going to do like a 2-minute primer on what appointments even are, so we all kind of are working from the same baseline. I'm going to zip through this pretty quickly because I really want to have a lot of time to spend with our guests today, but we love connecting. So if you have questions, please drop them in the chat, shoot us an email, and we'll do our best to respond. All right, so a little primer on boards and commissions. Boards and commissions are created through city, county, state, and federal government through laws, rules, executive orders, and regulations. Local boards and commissions play a really important role in our communities, providing direction and oversight for various aspects of public life. Boards and commissions require community member representation, provide transparency between citizens and government, and ensure accountability of all appointed and elected officials. With a multitude of perspectives, experiences, and talents, you all, women, bring invaluable contribution to the decision-making processes at all levels of governance. And then just a little note, commission and board are often used interchangeably, but they are different. Commissions tend to be established for a specific action or are more regulatory, while boards are more managerial or supervisory and investigative. And so we've got some examples for you. So for example, the Neighborhood Planning Commission may vote to rezone a tract of land for a different use, or the Historic Preservation Commission might decide on what facade changes of historic landmarks can happen, or perhaps the Art Commission will decide on a public display that's going to go into the city square. So lots of different types of boards and commissions that exist. To learn more about these boards and commissions, honestly, y'all, most of you can just Google what exists in your municipality. Some areas are a little bit more transparent than others, but you should be able to see what boards and commissions exist in your area. And some will even list the vacancies, the application process, and have some contact information. And there is no shame in contacting that email that's on there just to ask questions and learn more. Again, if you have any questions about navigating this process, that's what we're here for. We're here to help make this process smoother for you. So that's a little primer. Like I said, I blew through that really fast. Hopefully, though, it gives us a good baseline. But now for the fun part. I'm super excited to have these two remarkable women on live with us today. They're deeply familiar with these logistics but most importantly, they're familiar with the value that boards and commissions actually bring to cities. I'm so thrilled to introduce them to you. Without further delay, please join me in welcoming Gayatri Agnew and Dean Victoria DeFrancesco Soto. So Gayatri is the senior director. I'm gonna read this because I haven't memorized your bios. I pared them down, but you for sure can go and like Google them, hop on LinkedIn, go to their websites, and you will find more information. But Gayatri is the Senior Director and Head of Accessibility Center of Excellence at Walmart, where we are today. Thank you for hosting us, Gayatri.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Gayatri comes to Walmart having worked in the public sector, both in government and nonprofits, and found her way to business because of her desire to work on impact at scale. Gayatri's personal mission is for more people to find purpose through the way they earn a living. I love that, by the way. She's a presidential leadership scholar and an Aspen Ascend Fellow working on changing corporate culture for working moms. She's active in the local community, serving on the Bentonville City Council, as well as on the national boards for the Vote Mama Foundation and Path Forward. Welcome, Gayatri.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah. And then Dean Victoria DeFrancesco Soto is the Dean of the Clinton School of Public Service at the University of Arkansas, and previously served as Assistant Dean at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. She's a political analyst for NBC News and Telemundo. Vicki is the first Latina dean at a presidential institution, and she was named one of the top 12 scholars in the country by Diverse magazine. Her areas of expertise include civic engagement, women, immigration, Latinos, and political psychology. Underlying all of her research interests is the applicability of high quality, rigorous research to on the ground policy realities. We love that at United Way, so I'm excited to dive in more there. As the Dean of the Clinton School, Victoria grounds her passion to support the next generation of public service leaders through the expansion of diversity, equity, and inclusion inside and outside of the classroom. Ladies, how amazing to have you both here today.
It's always so comfortable to have someone literally verbatim read your bio while you're sitting there.
It's so long.
Yeah,
okay.
right. And you're just like, am I blushing? How bad am I blushing? But
Or
thank you,
I'm
Katie.
awesome.
Thank you. Oh, yes. I mean, I'm awesome. So glad to be here. No, this is fun. This is fun that we get to do
It
this
is.
together.
We've been
I'm
planning
thrilled.
this,
Yeah, thrilled
for
that
a
you're in
while.
Arkansas.
Thank you. This is my first trip to Bentonville, and it's been amazing. I've heard about the rapid growth. We've got to explore the town and the city a little bit, City Square. It's really cool. But we're not here to promote Bentonville necessarily, although I'm sure they would love that. We are here to talk about appointments.
We would
y'all.
welcome all of you anytime. Come on down.
All right, so to kick us off, I'd love to hear about both of y'all's experiences with civic engagement, which is a very broad sort of softball
Sure.
question. But specifically, what has your journey looked like, and what obstacles have you or do you still face? And I'll let you decide who wants to go first with that.
This one right
Oh,
here.
goodness.
Right
Okay.
here.
All right. Well, so first of all, I'm obsessed with the civic leadership journey. I'm going to steal that phrase and start using that everywhere I go. So, I think for me, I don't know when and where it started other than, my mom. I was raised by a single mom. My mom's orientation toward community was toward helping. And I'm a somewhat impatient person. And I think I found my way to civics and public policy by virtue of the fact that if someone is hungry and you feed them, all you have done is fed them. And you haven't, like my young person brain went upstream pretty quickly and was like, but wait, why are they hungry? How do we make sure they're not hungry in the future, right? And so I think thinking in terms of systems orients you very quickly in terms of where those systems are managed and controlled. And so I don't think I had the words for public policy, but I've definitely been trying to affect public policy since early days on middle school city council, middle school student council, and just wanting to bring people together and say, I think this is a solvable problem. What if we change the rules from this to that? And so, for me, I was undergrad poli-sci, was law school bound, a path I never took. I ended up getting an MBA, and now I find myself decades later here at Walmart. So I think that worked itself out, but I fell in love with public policy really early on, and then fell in love with the link between the most important role in our government being the role of citizen and the pathways and avenues for citizens to be policymakers.
It's beautiful.
So not to be policymakers because they are elected, but to be policymakers because they are citizens and residents, and citizens and residents have experienced their community in unique ways. And how do you then share how that community is experienced? And I had the very good fortune of working for a governor in the state of Washington who I worked on her campaign, and then she brought me into her administration, Governor Chris Gregoire. She was elected in 2004. And she hired me into the administration to manage something called boards and commissions.
Ooh.
And I had no idea what that was. And so I learned the state of Washington, as an example, had at that time over 400 citizen boards and commissions with over 1,200 unique appointees. And my office was in charge of recommending all of those names to the office of the governor, and who then made the final appointments. And it was just this incredible crash course in the power of an individual citizen to affect change as a part of the Dental Quality Assurance Commission, which is really important because they regulate the rules around dentistry in the state, or the Stamp Advisory Commission. We at that time had in the state of Washington an advisory board to tell the federal government what to put on stamps. I think that board was eliminated, but different boards are created for different reasons. And so my journey, my civic leadership journey intersected really early with civic boards and commissions. And I have just been an absolute advocate ever since, that we're very comfortable with nonprofit boards. We understand corporate boards, but somehow we always forget the importance and significance of the civic boards.
Absolutely. I love that. Yes, you're just by being a citizen, that is a massive qualification, right, to do this kind of service on boards and commissions. So that's beautiful. I'm going to steal that piece. So we'll just trade.
Yeah, trade phrases.
Nuggets. Good. Vicki, how about you?
So I just learned that our civic leadership journey also started in middle school. I also officially, that's where it started. I can go back.
All right, force.
I mean, I was that student council nerd. I will gladly wear that badge of honor, 7th grade.
There will be pizza.
There will be
pizza in the assembly. That's where it starts.
Here's the thing, I can't point to this being something that, I saw in my family. My mother was an immigrant, so she really wasn't that engaged. My father, I think he voted, but I felt a pull to want to do and to want to affect change. Whether it was figuring out, what we were going to do for Hands Across the Border, or what we were going to have for pizza night. I just saw the power of being at the table. And at the time, I didn't know that was the pull. I've since then put my finger on it. So my background is a little bit different. So I'm an academic by training. I'm a political scientist. And so I was looking at civic engagement and at leadership through that academic lens. And, my research ended up centering on women in politics. And one of the things that has always frustrated me, and this frustration has been a fuel for me, is the discrepancy in voice. Because if your voice is not at the table, the cliche, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, was seeing that when we're talking about electeds, we're half, if not more, of the population is women, yet in Congress, we're only about a quarter. Across our states, we're less than a quarter in many instances. When you get down to municipalities, it's still around a quarter. There's a lot more variation, but it's still far from parity. And that was always something that consumed me both personally and professionally in terms of research. But then looking at the pipeline to having a voice at the table, the piece of boards and commissions and appointed positions was one that was always ignored. So as I started looking at this vehicle to being a voice at the table, or B, a stepping stone for figuring out how you want to flex your civic engagement muscle, I want to shine the light on this because this is the hidden gem in our democracy. So for me, it's figuring out how do we, let women know about these opportunities, but then B, prepare them for it.
Yes.
So this is where I come at it from, which is let's get us out there, and then let's get us equipped to do what we need to do in exercising our civic engagement.
Yes, so our research at United We specifically talks about the fact that women don't feel asked or equipped to do this type of work. And so that's really where we're trying to just kind of needle in even further. How do we equip and ask? So I'm going to pause right now.
Yeah.
Ladies on the call and men who have women in their lives, you know, we're asking you, you are able to do this and we're a resource for you. So if this is sort of, if you're on the precipice, you're not sure, like take this as your sign that, yeah, let's take the next step forward. So I feel like I had to do that.
Yes,
And,
please.
yes. And then kind of going back a little bit to what you said about boards and commissions, kind of the local municipal positions, non-elected, being ignored. Why do y'all think that is? Why do you think it's not front and center or as sort of on the same par as the elected positions or the more, you know, ubiquitous positions?
I have a lot of opinions about that,
Yeah.
but I'll start with two. So I think if we go like all the way back into what does it mean to be a resident? What does it mean to be involved in my community? And I said, what do you do that makes you civically active? I think most people would say, I vote, right? Like you immediately go to I vote. And voting is incredibly important, and it's a way that you exercise and engage in the civic process and flex your civic muscle. But what I think is so brilliant about how almost all, I think actually all of our towns and communities were built and shaped is policy was written to include the voices of residents. And that policy that was written to include the voices of residents are boards and commissions. But it's of a long time ago. And I genuinely think we have just sort of forgotten what their function is, in part because we haven't talked about it.
Mm.
So in the city of Bentonville, for example, almost all of our municipal boards are appointed. The board members are appointed by our mayor. Some are confirmed by our council, but all generate from the power of a singular elected position. And that's the case in a lot of places. At the state level, it'd be the governor. In a lot of the county roles, it's the quorum court lead or the county judge or the county executives, depending on the language used in your area. And to really unpack why boards and commissions aren't talked about, we have to talk about power. We have to talk about participation. And so if you're a leader, I'm so proud of Mayor Orman here in the city of Bentonville, who made a commitment to make all citizen commission appointments public. So just say like, hey, if there's a vacancy upcoming, our city is committed to letting our residents know that we have an opening on the Arts Commission, an opening on the Planning Commission, an opening on, the Airport Advisory Board, and we want residents to apply. And I'm so proud of her for that. And I think it's a wonderful, engaging, and transparent choice.
And that's not common.
But I was gonna say, the majority of towns don't do that.
Right.
And you can say it's because they don't have capacity or they don't have time. My concern is that it's also convenient when you're running a community to hold all of that power and to be able to say, well, I know Vicky, so I'm gonna put Vicky on the planning
Less
commission.
messy, maybe,
Yeah,
less
I mean,
work
it's-
splits.
And I,
Yeah.
it doesn't come from a negative place, it comes from a place of efficiency maybe. But if we really unpack the demystification of that power structure, we really ask, like, what was the original intent of having a planning commission or a housing commission or
Right.
a parks and recreation commission? It was the inclusion of all voices in our governance process. And so the idea that those shouldn't be transparent is sort of, it's silly. It's
Right.
like, well, of course they should be transparent. Of course, folks should know and be able to raise their hands and be able to say, I want to be a part of directing the future of my community's choices around parks and recreation.
Well, that's in direct opposition of the intent
Yeah,
of
exactly.
these bodies to begin
But we
with.
gotta go all the way back in history to say,
Yeah.
why did they even exist in the first place?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have anything to add to that, Vicki?
I do, and I think there is a parallel to serving in elected office where we know from research that women usually have to be asked a couple of times
Mhm.
to run before they actually decide to run. I think there are larger societal structures at work, historical contexts at work, but we're not gonna get into that now, we don't have time. But so I think part of it is, in addition to the lack of transparency or the need for a more formalized process, is also just as women, we need to stop waiting to be asked.
Mhm.
And that comes from us. Like, trust me, I have these internal conversations where I'm like, I'm just gonna step up and do it. And, you know, kind of my default would be just kind of sit back and wait to be asked or wait to be called on. So I think it's at an individual level. I also think that it is organizations such as these that push women forward. So I do think it's also breaking a mold, breaking a tradition of waiting to be asked or saying, I'm gonna wait till my kids are older. I'm going to wait till this, whereas with our male counterparts, they tend to not think that way. Also professionally, the work-life balance tends to be different. So I think that another piece of boards and commissions is for those of us who are at the table to then start changing things to make it more available to women, such as the Vote Mama project that we mentioned earlier. Like, you know what, maybe we don't make the board and commission meetings during dinner time.
Right?
Okay.
The witching hour.
The witching hour,
Yeah.
maybe. So I also think there are institutional factors
For sure.
that we can change to make it more amenable for women, for working women, for moms. But I also think there is a piece that has to come from us individually and us collective as women who want to exert our voice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious from our audience today, if y'all want to type it in the chat, what are the barriers that have kind of held you back or are holding you back that you're willing to share with us? And maybe you are serving now, what makes it hard, you know, about the constraints or the structure? Feel free to share that with us. That's really helpful for us to know as, you know, as United we want to listen and hear what women are saying so that we can help move the needle with kind of, you know, with the force of our network behind us pushing that. So yeah, I think that's super helpful to hear.
Katie, there's a just one thing I want to address around boards. So a lot of times, and I'll take the Bentonville Parks and Recreation Board as an example, right? In our statute, it calls out certain qualifications or certain qualities, right? It's really an asset to the city to have individuals with certain kinds of expertise on that board.
Right.
Folks who have a background in gardening or city planning or experience with the kind of infrastructure that goes in parks. But without doubt, in every statute that constitutes any board, it will always also say, and at least, and it's often 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, sometimes half of the committee, that you don't want quote unquote experts, that you want a quote unquote like local resident.
Right. With lived experience.
And yes, with
you
lived
know,
experience.
play at
And
those parks, walk on
so
those
what
trails.
the number one thing I want everyone who's joined us today to take away is that by virtue of living in the community where you're seeking to serve, you are an expert. You are an expert in that community. You are an expert in the lived experience of how, you know, for me, I have a 7-year-old and 9-year-old. We use the parks a lot. That's a different kind of expertise than being an arborist, but it's not less valuable.
Right.
And I can't actually think of any, like we recently convened a short-term rental advisory committee. So short-term meaning not in statute, just for a period of time. It's a 6-month assignment. And there's 9 members who serve on that short-term committee. And 2 of those members were called to be non-owners of short-term rentals, and those were the hardest positions to fill. So we were overwhelmed by applicants for the committee who own and operate short-term rentals in town, by people who have vested interests, right? By people whose day jobs and expertise and work intersects with the decisions being made. It's actually the citizen who's there to look out for the interests of the community that are often least represented on these bodies. And so in that sense, it's actually like your expertise as a resident in your community that makes you a really powerful voice, right?
Yes.
And so now that being said, like if you are an arborist or you are an artist or you are a city planner, that is an expertise that your community, particularly your municipality, could benefit from you bringing to a board, but not having that expertise does not make you unqualified to be on a board.
Yes. Yeah, and we actually had a question in the chat that just said, am I qualified to serve? And I think that answers it beautifully. You are. And for sure, some boards will have vacancies and they may even call out, like in our municipality, it'll call out, you know, we really are looking for someone that has experience with accounting, who can, you know, and that's great. And I love that, but that's not always the case. It's truly, do you live in that area? Do you use that amenity? Great, you're qualified. Another question that kind of came up is just balance, right? you have two young children. I have a young child. Like, how do you balance, or maybe not children, maybe you're caring for aging parents, or
Sure.
you just have a busy job. How do you balance the civic leadership, engagement, and giving back to your community with other responsibilities?
I've got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old,
Okay.
so, and my mom, so
Mhm.
lots of moving parts here. I think I want to back up and have us think about civic engagement on a spectrum and not an either or.
Yeah.
And that's going to depend on where you are in life, right?
Yes.
So if you've got a toddler and a newborn, your civic engagement is probably going to look different than if you have an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, a
Mhm.
9-year-old. So, because I think instead of saying like, I can't do anything, knowing, hey, voting, that's a great start. And then start walking it forward. Like, so maybe your participation is in a board or a commission that doesn't meet that often, but you're still able to exert a voice. And as you go forward, you get involved in a more active board or commission. Maybe you get involved in a political campaign. Maybe you get involved in a referendum. So I really want us to have that spectrum mentality instead of like, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm too busy. Because I think that way you think about civic engagement in a progressive way because it's a skills building entity,
Yes.
right? Because civic engagement, it's like working out. You build that muscle.
Mm.
And you build that muscle in terms of expertise and also confidence to be in those rooms with the lawmakers, with the decision makers. So I think that is one way to do it. Okay, so that's my like big theoretical piece of it. The second is what I went back to when you do get a seat at the table is you figure out how to make it more accessible for the work-life balance to be in balance. All
To
right,
speak up when you're saying like, this is not doable for me, so it's probably not doable for others.
for most people,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, we're not going to meet at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday because that basically means, working moms can't make it. Maybe it was because it was older folks or retirees.
Mhm.
So you just have to look at things with an equity lens when it comes to, are we making this as accessible as possible to a wide range of the population? So I think that that's the second very important piece of that.
Absolutely. I have so many questions that popped in my head as you were talking, and I'm gonna really try to focus it. So I'm gonna skip around a little from
Sure.
but
We're not gonna stick to the script.
No.
Oh,
we go rogue here at United We. One of the things, maybe it's an elephant in the room, both of y'all are incredibly successful, highly educated, your resumes are impressive. There's a lot of people, I'm assuming on the call and in general, who maybe they're just getting started maybe they're younger and they don't quite have that tenure, the background yet, or maybe they're not, and they just, that's not what they've chosen in life. Maybe they're feeling super intimidated. What encouragement would you give them as they are considering civic engagement and they're feeling that intimidation?
oh, I have
I have a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, for me personally, probably one of the most formative experiences that I had was in high school, and it was a board and commission. And what it was our school district had a site council, which did all the siting for schools, and they had a youth representative on the site council. And I had basically no idea what was being said in 90% of those. No, I really
Yeah.
didn't. Like, we'd be looking at like architectural plans, and there was a commissioner who sat next to me who just loved that there was a youth leader on the council, and he would just be like, this means that and this means that. He made the meeting that didn't feel accessible to me as a 15-year-old because of my lack of knowledge base of architecture and school siting more accessible to me. And that for me just clicked something about the civic process, or these spaces, these centers of power are occupied by people, and there are rules that govern how they operate, but it is just a bunch of humans coming together. And curiosity is the most powerful quality that you can bring into that space. And there's never going to be a time when somebody in that space, not everybody, but somebody isn't going to be willing to bring you along from where you are to wherever you want to be.
Mm.
But being vulnerable enough to seek out those mentors, those supports, those older gentlemen who know architectural plans really well and are willing to lean over and explain stuff.
Yes.
You know, I think, and I think it boils down though to willingness to be vulnerable, to put yourself out there, to try, but then to have an access point, to have a way to actually access what that conversation is or what that body of work is. I think actually from a diversity of age perspective, I think youth representation, either in formal or informal ways on these boards, several municipalities, unfortunately not yet Bentonville, have youth city councils that shadow govern their community so that those young people are learning that and having that experience of making those tough decisions around different kinds of issues or budget.
Yeah.
And those are so formative. Those experiences can be
Usually.
so formative for having folks not feel locked out of political systems.
Absolutely. And how fun. I would think. I was a little nerd. It sounds like it.
We were all nerds.
We're all
It's
nerds.
possible.
Yes.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier, how politically nerdy we were. But you know, the one other thing I would just, one other thing that I would just say is, anywhere and everywhere I go and speak, and I know Vicky does this too because I've heard her do it. I'm not here because of any title I have held. I'm here because I'm a woman who cares about the community around me. And anyone, man or woman on the line, you are worthy to be in these spaces and places and influencing policymaking decisions because of who you are, not a title you hold, not a specific educational degree you've obtained. And that's work we do with ourselves about why and how we have a right to be in spaces. And so I just want to share out with the whole audience that I spent a lot of time thinking I didn't have a right to be in places and spaces. And then at some point something shifts in you and you go, well, if I'm here, I'm just going to be here. Let me pull my seat all the way up to the table and be part of this. But that's in society definitely sends a lot of messages about that, but you don't have to listen to those. You don't.
Right.
So I think probably one of my most formative experiences was when I was in college and I worked as a telemarketer and catering as well. And I just learned to not care being told no. So I mean, I've got
telemarketer, yeah.
all the letters after my name. It's that. And I know a lot of people with lots of letters behind their name, and they probably wouldn't be qualified to do boards and commissions because they don't have the interest or the passion. Right? That's all I ask is interest and passion. You can get up to speed on architectural design.
That's right.
You can get up to speed on legislation on childcare regulation. You can get up to speed on that. You can't teach someone an interest, a curiosity, a passion for civic engagement. So yes, it does not matter what is on your resume, what is or what is not on your resume. I do want to go back and amplify the mentorship piece, however, because like I said, I'm a lifelong learner. And while I would love to see maybe United We putting forward kind of some core 101 curriculum. But at the end of the day, it is also mentorship and seeking out mentors that have been in that position previously, that can just be maybe not even a formal relationship, but just a touch point, like, hey, can I give you a call if something comes up? But that's it. That's what it takes to be an effective, civically engaged leader in your community. That's it.
Yes, that interest, that passion breeds that curiosity. And as long as you remain curious, you're going to figure it out, you're going to learn, and it's going to be fun. That curiosity, it breeds a desire to continue kind of learning. And I love that. And part of United We and joining this AP, the Appointments Project, is joining the United We network. And United We has an expansive network of women who can do that. And we would love to leverage the women maybe who are on the call or not that are already a part of that network to raise their hands and say, you know what, actually, I would love to be connected with somebody. So maybe that's something that we'll consider down the road. The power of the network, the power of we is huge, and we don't want to minimize that. This is not about United We as an organization. It is about United We as a mobilizer. We're here to mobilize y'all because y'all are the experts of your community, not us. So I love that. So yeah, stay tuned. Maybe some new programs.
Yes.
I can't promise that. Our executive director's in here. She's probably gonna kill me for saying that, but it's fine. We'll move on. So I want to kind of shift a little bit to policy again, since that's where we're all a little bit nerdy and don't like have your eyes glaze over. This is gonna be very interesting as we quickly talk about this. But one thing that's really interesting about bringing the two of y'all together, besides the fact that you're friends, which I love, is that there's some fascinating intersections in y'all's work, even though you do pretty different things, right?
Yeah.
So Gayatri, you're a member of United We's Childcare Task Force. And Vicki, you have rich experience connecting research to boots on the ground policy work like task forces.
Mhm.
So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on what's happening in the policy space, kind of from the angles that y'all, the childcare policy space, from the angles that y'all are working. And if that's, or it doesn't have to be childcare.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Is that
Yeah.
how has the research impacted our ability to move the needle on policy issues, specifically childcare access?
Well, I'll start off here because in 2021, I co-authored a study with the YWCA looking at the childcare crisis. And in a nutshell, we've been in a childcare crisis for decades, essentially since American women entered the workforce in mass, in the 1970s or so. But the COVID pandemic just, brought it into bright relief of how broken we are. And when you compare us with our peer countries, our G7 countries, it's embarrassing. And so I think that it's easy to say it's broken, it's not working, is breaking it down into the chunks, right? And one of them is accessibility. Even if you have a lot of money, it's hard to find childcare.
Yes.
Now, that is exacerbated if you don't have resources. And then that bleeds into the second issue, which is the cost of it.
Yes.
I mean, where women sometimes have to say, I can't go to work because it's more expensive to have my child in daycare.
Or I'm working to pay for daycare.
I'm working to pay for daycare. So those are two of the issues issues. And then getting a little into the wonky weeds, it's regulation that has not been able to be responsive to the needs, aside from, not having enough, government dollars go toward childcare, which in my view, there should be more. This is integral toward economic development.
Sure.
But also in thinking about, you want to have safe places for childcare, but you don't want to make it overly onerous so that female entrepreneurs who want to start a daycare center just can't make it work because there's so much red tape. So, I think that those for me are three of the principal spheres. And the last thing I'll end on before kicking over to Gayatri is that we need to stop thinking about childcare as a women's issue. This is an issue about the economy. It's an issue about the American economy, because if we really want to be a strong economy, we need our family units to be well supported. Women, men, the American family. So it's also changing that frame, because it's sometimes easy for men to say like, well, I that's something I really don't deal with. Well, you deal with dollars and cents.
Yes.
And you care about the economy. So let's talk about childcare.
So we couldn't have planned this better because as you're speaking, I'm like, this is, you may well have sort of read the United We sort of position on childcare and what they're trying to do on policy. And you can speak better to that with your experience on the childcare task force. But exactly what you were talking about is where United We is really trying to push some things forward. And so do you want to add to
Yeah,
that?
what Vicki just said, which is I think the most important part, is it's very easy to say like research lives over here, and somehow between research and research findings and policy living over here, like they're not connected or interconnected. But you talked about breaking it down into the chunks. And so I had the opportunity last year to serve on Arkansas's Women's Commission and to chair our subcommittee on care and caregiving. And I think it's worth noting, I'm very proud of the Women's Commission for this. The original subcommittee name was childcare. And in our first meeting of the subcommittee, we talked about the fact that childcare, while perhaps the largest facet of care, it's the burden of care, air quotes, burden of care that falls disproportionately to women in the American economy is not limited to tiny humans.
Right.
It is inclusive of family members, whether that be parents, siblings, spouses, right, who may need care, and that care may be needed temporarily, or that care may be needed long-term. The care of children is a time-bound period of care,
Right.
right? And so if you look at the continuum of care and the types of care that are needed, it's not just about childcare, but a lot of what we learn in how our society provides childcare can help us understand what are some of the realities and constraints in that. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from the research we did on the Women's Commission was the importance of the specificity. And so similar to what Vicky's describing, we looked at quality, availability, and affordability. And those are three totally different pieces of the access to early learning care puzzle. You can often have one but not the other. We have a number of very high quality centers here in Bentonville, but they have long wait lists, so they are not available.
Right.
And then get into the question of affordable. But one of the things that we learned was we actually have a huge deficit in Arkansas of availability for the 0 to 12 months, but even more so 0 to 6 month, your infant care. Part of that being the tiniest of humans need the most care.
Right.
And so you have a higher cost in your early
You need more
care,
caregivers.
right? Yeah.
Or,
And not just that, regulations are different. And so through a number of different things, the state was able to change and raise the reimbursement rate for infant care as compared to pre-K care. So your 2 and 3 year olds who still need a lot, but don't need as much as a 2-month-old, right? And that issue of disproportionate access to type of care and age of the child is directly connected to whether there's paid family leave available.
yes.
So if I have access to 3 months of paid family leave, I'm not likely to put my child in a care setting at 6 weeks of age, right? And so these policy issues, you both have to break them apart to find what's the piece of the puzzle that I can solve for and which part of the public policy landscape can solve for it. But then also, how are they interconnected, right?
Yes, yeah.
How
does one influence the other,
exactly,
either positively or negatively?
Yeah. So I think Arkansas has actually made some incredible improvements to access to early learning care. We have a long way to go. The biggest issue remains affordability.
Yeah.
But we do have quite high quality care in a lot of our regions. But they're, wait lists, all the rest of it. Everybody knows
Seriously,
the
the wait lists are so
and
long.
just the one other thing I'd introduce is, during COVID, as folks kind of came out of office buildings and rehomed their work, you've seen a huge shift away from center-based care, which, to your point about regulation, that then creates a business opportunity for neighborhood-based or home-based care, because folks are working out of their homes and not their office buildings, and therefore are wanting their kids in close proximity to their homes. There's a number of different tech tools as well that have introduced the concept of backup care or family care, where public funds in some cases are introduced into a system where you're able, for example, when you have to call your sister or your grandmother or your someone in your village to do backup care for a child, that you're actually able, through different programs and systems, either through corporate or government dollars or as an individual, to compensate that person for that care. So it's starting to bring to life, sorry, I could talk about this for hours and hours, but when we talk about caregiving for the tiny people, for the babies, it's not just about dropping a baby off at a center. We also have to think about the entrepreneurs that are operating smaller early learning centers and all of the new technology tools that are coming online to help people access and pay for care.
Let me add in another piece here, which is the caregivers.
Yes.
And go a little bit deeper on that, we already know that it is very difficult in terms of affordability. Childcare is expensive. But what many folks may not know is that our childcare givers are some of the lowest paid workers.
Right.
Right? Many of them living at the poverty line or below. Not surprisingly, a lot of these are women and women of color. So we've got some major problems to address here, right? So one is the affordability so that more people can access it, but we also want to make sure that these caregivers also have a dignified quality of life and are able to care for their own children,
right,
and be able to provide for them. So it is something like, okay, maybe we can bring down the cost of childcare, but we can't do that on the backs
right
of
the
other
providers.
women.
Right. It's two sides of the same coin, right? We have to look at both
Yes.
sides. Yeah, absolutely. So this is great, and we could probably talk about this forever, but I do want to kind of bring it back to kind
Yeah.
of that local level.
Yeah.
How could an appointee of a board or commission help influence something like this?
First of all, having experience, right? And you can have experience from different angles. Maybe you are you come from the pre-K academic world. This is something you know about curriculum,
Mhm.
or you're a mother, or you're
Right.
someone who has worked in a childcare facility. But what I think is so important is to have a lived experience in addition to, say, an expertise. So bringing that to bear. And the irony here is these are the folks who probably have the least time to give.
Yeah.
But why this is such a critical civic engagement intersection point in doing that. Because this is the only way that we are going to solve the issue, because childcare is an issue that is going to take federal level intervention, state level intervention, and municipal level intervention. So I think that we need to have engaged women at every one of those levels. We can't be like, oh, that's DC, or in Arkansas's case, that's Little Rock, that's over at the governor's. No, we can also do things here at the local level. So it's figuring out where you can slot yourself best.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think all public policy is interconnected, but when we talk about childcare specifically, housing availability, housing affordability, and transportation, especially here in Northwest Arkansas, where we don't have a functional or usable on a daily basis transit option, transportation, housing, and the co-location of care, access to care facilities or childcare facilities within that infrastructure become really important. So, as we look at housing and zoning and siting, where are those points? Childcare centers don't tend to be, they're not sustainable businesses to operate in most scenarios. So they're not going to go into some of the key business corridors where people are. And I think that's an example where your planning commission, your city council, even your parks and recreation, right? Co-locating parks in your schools or care centers, like those are all choices that influence how you're able to address the dynamics in a community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thank you, ladies, for that. I'm going to look in the chat real quick. We've had some questions. I've tried to kind of lob them to you as we've gone, but I want to make sure that we are not missing. And I see some great comments in the chat. So thank you all so much for participating in that. What if you're the only, I think I'm gonna ask this one. We'll let you guys talk, and then I see the clock and I think we're running out of time. So we'll do this one question, and I'm sorry if we don't get to the rest of them, y'all. We will do our best to follow up with you in the follow-on email. And again, you can always reach out to us. Please pester us if you want to know more. What if you're the only woman on a board?
I'm always the only one.
I was going to say, like,
Okay. All right. So let me rephrase. How do you? What advice do you have for feeling supported and not feeling diminished when you're on that board? Do you just fake it? Do you just show? I mean, what do? Maybe someone who's not as outspoken as perhaps the three of us are.
I mean, I guess it's sad to say that I've become immune to it. So this is probably a bad thing to say, but I think it's always have your true north.
Yeah.
My mentor, when I started this position, gave me a compass.
Oh.
And I have it on my desk. And she said, never lose sight of your true north. And, professionally for me, that is students and student success. Right. And all of the stuff I may deal with, and personally, it is my family and my children's well-being. So I think that when you can center yourself, and for each of us, that's going to be a different center, but what is your true north? And stick to that. And will you feel uncomfortable? Yes. I'm not going to lie to you. Sure, there might be a little bit of discomfort, but let that true north trump that.
Yeah.
And yes, there is a piece of the fake it till you make it. And just go in there and say, I belong here.
Yes.
And if you exude that, others will catch on to that as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Vicki. I think the other thing, and I'll just take my own experience serving on Bentonville City Council for the last 3 years. I was pretty quiet for the first 2 years, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I didn't know the system. I didn't know how it worked. right? Like there's words said in a room and then there's an unspoken language in every room. And you can get really lucky and have a mentor who's going to animate for you the unspoken language, or you can be in the position of I was, where no one's going to come and say, this was said, but this is actually what's meant, or the majority of the decisions made in this meeting were actually decided before the meeting, or, you know, just all kind of that, the dynamics of power, right? This is demystifying the dynamics of power. And so I think give yourself some grace and some space to get to know the space you're in. If you've been invited to a meeting and it's a one and done, it's a 1 hour meeting with somebody, and that's your moment to like speak up and say your piece. But for me, in the example I'm giving, I was elected to a 4-year term. And so not that I wanted to be ineffective in my first 2 years, but I wanted to be as effective as possible over the span of that term. And so I was a little quieter in my first 2 years. In this 3rd year, we have created a finance commission for the city of Bentonville, which we have not had, which I now chair very proudly on behalf of our city. And it's because I just sat and I listened and I learned, and that learning equipped me with the knowledge base I felt I needed to really show up and bring not just my views to the table, but the views of those whose views are not otherwise in the room. So, you know, I think when you're the only, you know, when you're the only woman in the room or the only anything, I'm often the only person of color in the room. I think you actually have a unique gift in that room and responsibility, because you know your lived experience is unique. You know it is. And so you are actually gifted with the opportunity to share that experience. The advice I would give is share it in a way where you're sharing it as an equal at the table, and not as like the one, let me just make a statement on behalf of all women, right? So get to know the people in the room, build trust, and build your own confidence that what you have to bring to that table, whatever that table is absolutely worth it. So.
Yeah, I think that foundational work is just as critical as any vote you may give, any committee you may form, because without it, you're not going to be able to be as effective. And you don't always need that foundational work, but there's no shame in that game at all, right? Like, that's right. Do the thing that you need to do to position yourself really well to be effective. So I love that. I think it's hard. I think women feel like we have to go, do, and prove ourselves, and we don't. And so taking that foundational time is absolutely beautiful.
Well, this was said to me once, and I repeat it all the time. Your job is not to know, it's to know what you don't know.
Yeah.
But not to present as though you don't know when you do it, right? So how have you figured out how to do that, right? Nobody wants to know it all at the table and in the room. That's not your role. It's good questions. It's curiosity. It's that passion and interest that Vicki talked about. That's, I think, really the most powerful thing that board and commission leaders bring into the spaces.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, ladies, I'm going to wrap our time today. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your insight, your energy around this. And if y'all feel inspired by what you heard today, we would love it if you would take the next step in your civic leadership journey. And we think that next step is just to join AP, join the Appointments Project. You can do that. I think Amy's posting a link in the chat. There's a QR code right there, easy peasy. You can scan it. It's a very quick process, and it just gives us, United We, your information so that we can continue to connect you to this network. When you join AP, you get, again, a network connection. You get notifications about different events that we're doing. We'll even send you a toolkit, kind of an AP 101, couple page, flyer to help get you started. The second thing we would love is your feedback. And I know everyone asks for a survey, and that's annoying, but I promise it's quick. I actually really like filling out surveys. I like filling all the, I love to tell my opinion if you couldn't tell. So that's also going to be linked in the chat. This really helps shape our next event that we do. We really do believe in listening to the women that work with us. Thank you again to Gayatri, to Dean Soto, to all of you for being with us today. We hope that you will join the Appointments Project and United We Network and share with your friends. Remember that you are capable and ready to serve, and we will see you next time on Appointments Live. Bye, y'all.